Hi, and a very, very big welcome to Leading Ladies Lunches. We have an amazing guest with us today and a host. And I hope you've got something yummy to eat, something good to drink. And I am here today coming to you from Texas, live from Texas. It's been an amazing day, already been horse riding as you would in Texas. But as you can see, I'm in a hotel room and the girls were impressed. I did make my bed. So, so that's the good news. But just to let you know, this is a live webinar. So we want you to be able to, ask questions by putting them in the Q&A or jump in the chat. We're going to answer anything live for you today. If you hear something you like, give us a reaction. But we want this to be a private space for you too, to one, eat your lunch, have your drinks. Perhaps you're walking while you're listening to this, and be able to ask those questions privately as well. So, big welcome to today's lunch. And I'm going to hand you over to your amazing host here in America, Sneha. Please take it away.
Good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm Sneha Vialva, author, speaker, and forever growing. Our very special guest today is Vicki Tyler, founder of the Grow Zone, a bold advocate for women leaders, and a TEDx international speaker. Every woman has felt the overload of be more, do more, push harder, carry everything. They know what it is to burn out rather than burn bright. They experience the world's pressure to embody the three Ps: pretty, productive, perfect. It's as familiar a script for girls as it is for grown women, for singles and partnered alike. I hit burnout at 17, and a survey of my high school just a few years ago found more than 43% of students said they've experienced burnout 5 or more times in high school. And more than 44% said burnout damaged their physical health. These are high school students. But for me, 17 was just the beginning. I struggled throughout my adulthood, and my body kept the score. A survey of more than 10,000 desk workers in 6 economies found that 46% of women experience burnout compared to only 37% of men. I won't say only, the 37% is ridiculous as well. Many women know what it is to dim themselves under the weight of more. Their health, their needs, their vitality, they all get snuffed out. To burn bright, instead of burning out, requires space, support, subtraction, sustenance. Spaces that don't drain, support that cheers us on, subtraction of what's not essential, and sustenance to fuel us on. To borrow a phrase from our guest, Vicki Tyler, this is the grow zone. And to grow as leaders requires sowing, pruning, reaping, and sharing. It requires intentionality. We must determine what we value most, lean into the essence of how we were formed, and remember time is too short to live by somebody else's script. To be a leading lady, we must first lead ourselves so we can burn bright, not burn out, and have the strength and clarity to lead other women as well. Vicki Tyler, we are so happy to have you. Vicki is a New Zealand US women's leadership strategist, founder of the Grow Zone, former president of Flight Center USA, and creator of the corporate sleepwalking framework. Vicki survived 2 near-death spinal accidents in her 20s, and she developed frameworks to turn fear into fuel. She works with women to spot when they're on autopilot, start raising their hands, and create opportunities in every room they walk into. She blends neuroscience, real-world boardroom experience, and unapologetically honest stories. Vicki helps women move from playing it safe to leading from the front of the pack. Welcome, Vicki. We are so thrilled to have you with us here today.
This is a pleasure to be here. So, particularly thank you to Catherine and Sneha for having me as a guest. I'm honored.
We're so thrilled to have you. Would you like to share some thoughts with us, Vicki, about leading women?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would love to actually start by asking the women that are listening in to think back to the last time you were in a meeting or in a Q&A, And in that moment, did you raise your hand and speak up? Or did you find safety in silence? And if you did, that has become normal for a lot of us. It's really understandable. But particularly for women in the workplace, when we find safety in silence, I call this a component of corporate sleepwalking. What really got me started with my company was a statistic that came out of the US by intelligent.com. And it shared that 63% of young women in high school seniors, will not raise their hands and speak up in classes for the fear of the way they might be perceived or judged. So when I saw that word might win lotto, might get hit by a bus, might, it's the inability to control means safety and silence. KPMG did a study that showed 70% of high-performing women in corporate will also choose to remain silent at times. And then I like to put a bow on this because I'd be happy to share the link. Gallup did a study, or it's a report they do annually, and it shows that 79% of employees globally, and they asked 160 countries out of 195, 79% of employees globally are disengaged in the workplace. So disconnected from purpose, from feeling seen and heard and valued. So I use an ACT model, an ACT framework, which I'm going to talk about. I'm going to take a whistle-stop tour through today to help anybody that's on the call work out, am I one of the 79%, that almost 8 out of any 10 people in a room that at some point is corporate sleepwalking on any given day? And how do I wake up? So when I was 22, I came back from almost 5 years of traveling, not uncommon for Kiwis and Aussies, as Catherine will attend to. And I hung up my backpack in a little place, which was like if you dropped a pin in the middle of Australia, it's the red center, because I didn't want to go home broke. And I was walking one day on the top of a beautiful ravine with someone I was hoping to impress. And I don't know that I impressed him that day, but I did leave an impression. Because what happened is I slipped. And I remember falling. I don't remember passing out. And I don't remember hitting the bottom, which was 50 feet below, a dry riverbed. But I do remember waking up and hearing him yelling for help. And it sounded primal. I tried to get up and I couldn't. And that's when I really knew something was wrong. So it took a very complicated 4-hour helicopter extraction. And then I was airlifted down to the Royal Adelaide Spinal Unit by the flying doctors. And for any of the parents that are listening, I actually never got a chance to ask my mum what it was like to receive that call, but it was one of those calls where she's been in a serious accident. She has multiple skull fractures. She's conscious, but she's lost all of her hearing. She's paralyzed on the right-hand side of her face. Her neck is also broken in 2 places, her pelvis in 3 places, and her ankle. When can you get here? So the ACT model that I talk about, the first part, the A, is for awakening. The next 3 months for me were such an awakening to everything new. I'd been independent for 5 years traveling the world, but now I required everybody to do everything for me. The real awakening, however, and this applies to us in our work days, of like raising our hands and speaking up because something is like interesting to us or we don't think it seems right, right? There's an awakening. It's like, and then ties in the C, the curiosity. It became clear very quickly that I would be walking out of that spinal unit 3 months later. And I kind of got curious about why, because all of the other 11 people in the ward would not. Here's the thing about women. The beautiful thing about curiosity is it's the shortest route to connection. And women crave connection, personally and in the workplace. And curiosity, so raising our hands and asking questions, is the easiest and shortest route to connecting us to purpose, to help us feel seen and heard and valued. So I asked better and better questions about how everybody was doing. And hopefully, if there's time later, I'd love to tell you about one particular patient who changed my life forever. So I walked out of there 3 months later, and I landed in New Zealand, and life goes on. So I got my first real job as a travel agent in an inner city store. It was a young company, had 8 stores in New Zealand, and a lot of the learning was on the job. So I normalized that. Ooh, I'm not sure if I should be asking that question because perhaps I should know it already. So I would go off and find the information privately, or I'd ask somebody a question after the meeting because I didn't want to look dumb. And I also normalized that, oh, okay, we wait. And whenever you enter the company, that's when you get promoted. We just wait. I'd normalized that. I developed a fear of heights, as it turned out, from that previous accident. And as much as I was a shy person, I would go off anything. So I decided to go down to Queenstown. For anybody that has not been to New Zealand, it is a high mountain, tiny town in the south of the South Island of New Zealand. I like to describe it as the Swiss Alps meets Red Bull because there's high octane sports on tap everywhere, and the home of bungee jumping. So I decided I'd go and do a bungee jump to kill or cure this fear of heights. Now, for anybody that has done one, you know what I'm talking about when you mix sheer terror with extreme excitement. And I went to bed feeling a lot taller and invincible. I woke up a couple of hours later and I knew something was wrong. I was cold. I literally couldn't see my hands in front of my face. It was dark and it was wet. I didn't know where I was and I was screaming. Turns out I had sleptwalked for the first time out a second story window and landed so hard on the concrete path below in a sitting position, I had crushed and broken my spine again. I had never sleptwalked before in my life. I didn't know I had it in me. Apparently, it's not that uncommon. But I don't know if you believe in God or Allah or Buddha, the universe, or coincidence. But when I was in a spinal unit for a second time, I felt there was a message in here for me. And it started to freak me out because I couldn't get it. I'm sure you can relate to this. You're in a situation, you're like, why is this happening again? And I couldn't get it. And the interesting thing when you're like offline for 3 months is that you have nothing to do but think. Devices didn't exist then. You probably have more to do now. And an interesting thing started to happen to me. My questions went from fear-based, like, and I'm not sure if it's occurred to you, but like, what if this happens a third time? Oh my God, I mightn't be so lucky. To what now? And it went from why me to why not me? So I had an awakening that I have defied the odds of me still being alive and walking twice. And whilst I felt like I was closer to it happening a third time if I didn't get it, the likelihood of that really happening was way more. It was way more out there. But I had stumbled on a piece of science that shows, and it's neuroscience. In our brains, we have neural pathways. Deep curiosity and fear cannot coexist in our brains at the same time. So if you go into a meeting and you stay in a place of curiosity, I'm really trying to understand why the company is doing this or why it makes so much sense for our employees to be able to ABC. and why there's a reluctance to do it, or if there's bandwidth for it. Like raising our hands and asking the questions and staying in a curious space, there's no room for fear to come in and stop us raising our hands and speaking up. So my questions changed from fear-based to really curious. And I want to ask you the question that really changed it for me. I asked myself, am I meant for something more? And I'd really like you guys to ponder on this later. Are you meant for something more? Because my guess is one of two answers for most people listening is that I'm not sure, or maybe, or yes, I know I am. I just don't know how to get there. When you look at life through the lens of, am I meant for something more? This is an awakening. Then you get to get curious. More for some people is just going into the lunchroom during lunch hour when there's a lot of people there. For some, it's raising our hands and speaking up at meetings. For some, it might be, I want to start my own business. But more is different for everybody, but there's always room for more. And this is where the T, the try, so ACT, try is try, right? Am I meant for something more? What if I just try? So when I got back to work, leadership course, goal setting course, yes, please, yes, please. I signed up for Toastmasters. My friends were like, what? You? I started asking more questions. Self-development books, yes. I went within 12 months to the top salesperson in the country of the company I was working for. And then within another year, I was running the most profitable business for them worldwide. Within 10 years of that accident, that second accident, I was asked to go to the US as president of Flight Center USA. And the company was a $4 billion company at that point. So I implore women in the workplace to ask yourself, am I corporate sleepwalking? Where am I corporate sleepwalking? What have I normalized, particularly for women around raising our hands and speaking up in meetings? And just remember that science is on your side. That when you stay in a place of deep curiosity, it's very accessible for all of us, and you start compounding that, this becomes your new normal. Because safety and silence is absolutely corporate sleepwalking. And whilst it feels safe, it's not growth. And we want growth. We want more women raising their hands, speaking up, and adding perspective to the world, because it's still 90% male leadership and 10% female at the top. And the world's a little crazy right now. And having more female perspective and the way that we connect and communicate and collaborate would genuinely, seriously make the world a better place. So I'm going to leave it there, Sneha.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Vicky. What a powerful story. What an amazing story. I love that framework, awakening, curiosity, try. It reminds me when you talk about the distinction between curiosity and fear. I'm a preacher's daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter, and there's this concept of the opposite of faith is fear, right? And that's very similar in the sense of, when you ask that
Right.
question of, am I made for something more, right? That's
Yeah.
a really powerful, powerful question to ask ourselves. Um, can you talk a little bit about the grow zone? I really love that name. What does that phrase mean to you personally? And was there a season in your life that became your own grow zone?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the grow zone represents, and I started calling it the grow zone layer, but it's that really thin slice in our brains. It applies to everybody on the planet, where life is 10% what happens to us, things we just can't do anything about. But the 90% we can. And the growth happens where they meet. And that's the grow zone. So for me, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had some whoopsies as a teenager. I became a kind of a confidant for the three, like a best friend, my first boyfriend ever, and my parents had a very toxic divorce. And I was sinking, like I literally was underwater, like trying to support, but I didn't have the bandwidth. And I found a course. And I've actually gone back to uni recently to do a graduate diploma in applied psychology to understand if the inner work, some people might call it the woo-woo, but if it's actually really does impact our brains, because it certainly worked for me. And I wanted to understand if that was an anomaly, just some people. So transcendental meditation and visualization was the basis of this course. And I have used it. I used it, for example, when I was in hospital. Um, I would imagine at the base of my spine, little balls of white light, and I would send them with my eyes closed down to like the breaks, each of the breaks in my pelvis. I kind of knew, I asked where they were, and I would visualize these white balls just knitting and mending and healing. And so that I would walk out stronger when I knew I would be leaving walking. And I defied doctor's prognosis and really did get out there stronger sooner and was able to do, I've gone on to do triathlons and all kinds of things that doctors said I would never be able to do again.
Wow, that's amazing. Um, Another thing you talk about is leading with authenticity, but that can feel really risky. Have
Yeah.
you ever had a moment where being yourself as a leader cost you something?
Yes, I've actually had it happen to me recently. So, I mean, I think that's the beauty of life. Like when we, live life through that lens of, and I'd really love people to sort of borrow this and use this in the next couple of days and just keep it, like keep pulling it out. Am I meant for something more? It builds a resilience because you're going to have people around you who just operate on their normal. And, we have this pattern of, like we're talking about leadership for 90% men, 10% female. We're all living in a world that operates on that system. So when you push up against that and ask questions where nobody else is, so I had it with a young woman who was a leader. It was in a volunteer capacity. And I it didn't go well. And she reacted and she did something. And I'm like, okay, we need to talk about this. And there was no interest in doing that. And so it was a really challenging. I just kept reaching out saying, hey, and half a dozen times. And in the end, she had found safety in silence. And people will go out and ask people to reaffirm based on their story, they will have it affirmed that what they're thinking is correct. And I could see this happening, and I'm like, I just have to be patient. And look, she might not come to me for, 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but in the past, I've had people come back to me and have conversations later when we get our growing out of the way of that issue or a maturity or a change in life. And we're like, ooh, that's still sitting there and I want to make right. I had it happen with a contractor. And when I was in the US, I was flipping houses. And he came back to me 5 years later. He said he'd spoken to his minister and he's like, he just wanted to apologize. He kind of ripped me off. And it was really lovely. It was really, really lovely. So, what I do know is that if we give people sort of grace and space, that sometimes they have to just get there on their own. But also, what I will say to that is that as women, when I left Flight Centre post September 11, we started missing budgets and I was unceremoniously whacked. And that's when the imposter syndrome kicked in for me, interestingly, not when I was asked to go, but it was when I lost my job. But that's for another day. But the learnings from that were really, really hard. But what I learned as a result of, I then went on to build my own real estate development company and negotiating head to head with some of the big boys and big companies, multi-million dollar deals and winning. When you have that curious lens, but you are respectful and you have conviction and you're fearless, that little combination, tie a bow on it and take that home any day. Take it to the bank. It works because then, if you're super respectful, people can tell you you're wrong, but you just come back with respect and, respectfully disagree or agree. Does that make sense?
Hmm. I love that. Respectful, conviction, fearless. Like that's a really
Yeah.
powerful triad.
Yeah.
That'll get you far in life. And that's inner work as well as how you occupy space around other people, right? That's powerful.
Definitely, definitely. And I've got teenage boys And I have to use my I have to be really thoughtful about my timing. You know, timing is everything, and being super respectful, even when they're just like, oh my God, stop. Yeah.
That's great. Catherine, did you want to weigh in?
Look, I've just been listening to it and I think it's a great question. I popped it in the chat. Am I meant for something more? I think sometimes we feel that we're not doing what we need to do. But I think it's really important to step back because I think as women, there's a season for everything. And sometimes we just can't have everything in the one season, which is fine, but we can start to prepare for that season. We can start to prepare for what that is that we want more, maybe after our children are through school or that next step. I just love that it's not just one season.
Mm.
We do have seasons as women and but I love getting prepared. It's like if the cyclone's coming, we need to prepare, right? So if there is something that we're wanting to do, you know, we can start preparing for it, even in another season. And I think that's really important. And we are speaking about leading women today. And if it's okay, I'd love to share, and I'd love others to share who is someone that they look up to, is perhaps a role model for them. But I just remember going back in 2020, and we were given a master class in crisis communication. And it was given to us from the bottom of the world. And I don't follow many people, but I can tell you in 2020, I was listening to Jacinda at home. Every day, she would do a daily brief and get in with the people, letting them know what was going on. She'd speak to the Director General of Health every day and have her on and speak directly to the people. And I think this is one of the things that I respect the most with women, that we can be decisive, we can make those decisions, and we can also have that empathy and different leadership for different reasons. But in that crisis time, we were talking about Gallup strengths before. There was four things that came up during COVID. One, we wanted to trust our leaders. We needed to trust what they were telling us. And for some of the countries, we were being told by the leaders in the other countries what we also needed to do and to tell our people. And Australia and New Zealand did have minor deaths. People didn't like what was going on, but we did come out of it okay. I know there's so much everyone wants to say about COVID, but let's just leave it that she absolutely did a masterclass in crisis communication. And so the women leaders that I love the most really are the ones that are communicating what's going on. I hate when you feel you can't trust the leader, you can't trust, they're saying one thing and doing something else. And I feel too the leaders that give us hope for a better future, hope that this won't last too long, hope. Yes, this has happened, but we have hope for something else. And so they're the sort of leaders that I tend to gravitate to and hope that I am one of those leaders that when I answer you, one of the people asked the other day, they said, "Oh, did you make that up just to make that person feel good at the time?" I said, "No, I don't do that." It was the absolute truth. And if I had to give, if I hadn't had that example myself, I would have other examples from other times from someone else. But you can guarantee if you're going to ask me something that I'm going to give you the truth because I couldn't think of anything worse than to lose my trust with my people. And so it's interesting because we all have different values, and obviously that is one of mine. But just thinking of leading ladies, who was a lady that you loved and sort of why? Also, the interesting thing with Jacinda, she's only the second woman in the world, I think 1990, Pakistan maybe. The leader there gave birth. She was 9 months pregnant, gave birth during her leadership, took 6 months off, and then hit COVID. So, it was quite amazing to watch. And yeah, who else is out there today doing amazing things as the leader?
Mm.
Can I
I
just
love
add something to that? So interestingly, Jacinda also had to deal with the mosque shooting, which was it was like New Zealand's September 11. It was, and she handled that really beautifully. But one of the things that was super interesting that happened during COVID is that they did a study afterwards about the language that leaders used. And if you remember, Trump and Duarte in the Philippines and Bolsonaro in Brazil were in power at that time. And a lot of the rhetoric they used with the wording was very warmongering, was the way it was described, whereas the women were more collaborative. And some of the research that I've shown shows that women, a man might take 10 words to say something that a woman will take 45, because when we communicate, we do it to build rapport and therefore community and connection, whereas men just communicate to report. So it's really, I mentioned just really quickly, I wanted to add that in case there's anybody on that's listening that might be interested in participating, I'm doing a campaign 195, which is to ask a woman in all 195 countries in the world the same question about leadership. And my goal is to take this to the United Nations for the betterment of women, but also, secondly, how do we bring men into this conversation? Because we need the men to sort of part the seas to normalize. And if you like, sensitize, not desensitize men, sensitize to a new normal. And the question that I ask is, why do capable women in leadership still hesitate sometimes to raise their hands and speak up? So I'm not sure how we can share that link, but I would love to be able to do that with anybody that's listening.
Yeah, and it is interesting, but also we know that we need to read the room, and some women that could step up into positions, their season is with their family at their time. It's interesting because when we give birth, apparently the child's blood runs through our veins for that year, and then we have like a little chip that stays in our head forever. Um, and I love seeing women leaders around the world. It would totally be a different world. We all know that. And the German leader, can't think of her name. She was absolutely incredible. If you look her up as well, she retired. She did so many fantastic things. Yep. So when we're asking why aren't they doing it, then we have to do it.
And that's the other
It's
thing.
all
It's like if
all
you
about leading the way.
Yes, and for the women that are raising their hands and speak up, and they're like, I don't think that what she's talking about is a real thing. And I've had that before. If that's your orbit and your proximity, that is amazing. Like so cool. But take a look at the other women in the room and just notice because there is a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of safety and silence. And also, it's interesting when you talk about, yes, mums, and there was a time where I couldn't have done some of the jobs I've done because of my kids and their age. But also, it's interesting around sort of co-sharing roles, which is becoming more common and common with women because we are able to collaborate. So there's lots of different reasons, seasons, and ways that we can slice and dice. And this is where women are also really cool at coming up with solutions.
Hmm.
Oh, thank you. There we have. That's right, Angela Merkel. Yes, thank you so much for throwing that up, Sneha. Wow, absolute powerhouse, incredible woman. And there are so many out there. And I found I really stepped into what I needed to do when my husband had his breakdown. And that was when the global financial crisis was coming. And yes, we did lose everything in that and started again. And I started the training company and then it grew to the largest training company on the Sunshine Coast. I was taken over to China on a trade mission. And then I started speaking over there. And then once again, our world changed. And during this time, my husband and I swapped roles because I was one of those mums that if I'm going to be out there working 7 days a week, we reversed roles, and that worked really well as well. And I didn't start all my major travel till my last one was in year 12. So you've got to do what suits you as a woman. No one should ever tell you what you have to do or need to do. But I truly believe that women have this amazing heartbeat, and I do believe that it is up to each and every one of us to lift each other up. I often say for good heart health, we need to bend down and lift each other up. And Vicky, I've absolutely loved what you've said today. And it's definitely, I'm sure, given people food for thought. what is it that I really want to do more of or even step into. And I'm hoping that season for each and everyone listening here will allow you to be that leading lady that you want to be too.
Yes, please, if you feel comfortable, pop in the chat what you think this season is about and what season could be coming. We'd love to hear from you. Vicky, what was the link that you wanted women to submit to? Do you have that?
Actually, yeah, let me pop that in. Bear with me one sec.
Can get more submissions to that. That would be amazing.
And I've actually used AI to create a map which will show which countries I still need. So and I just did that with ChatGPT.
And
Got
if
through
you've
some
got
pretty,
any questions while Vicky's on here, throw them in so that she can answer that for you right now as well. We would love that. And I'd love to hear from you too. Like, who's a leading lady that you look up to? Let's have a look at throwing some of those in the chat. Who's one of yours, Sneha?
I'd say my mother and my grandmothers very much have led in powerful ways, whether it's in formal roles or as a parent. They've really modeled um, asserting themselves in contexts that maybe didn't weren't aligned at the time for them to assert themselves, and exerted authority, but in ways that were uniquely suited to them as women. So they weren't trying to act like men in female spaces, but they were fully themselves. I think that was really beautiful to witness, not just in not just in the circles around me, but in my heritage as well. So that's been profound for me.
I love that. And I love that too when women are empowered, it's not disempowering men. We're we're actually better versions of us for them at home and in business too. So whatever you need to do to make yourself feel empowered in the workplace or at home, then yeah, take those steps. My encouragement would be.
That would be great. Um,
I apologize, guys.
see the link in the chat. Thank you, Vicky.
That's just for the global report, in case anybody
Okay.
was interested in that. That would actually give them wherever you are in the world or interested. It shows kind of what's happening in workplaces. And then the second link that I popped there, that's the map for the 195 for the countries that I need. And at the bottom, there's a link about. So if you know a woman in leadership, and it's so interesting, I actually, and this is just the curiosity. I was at an event where the first New Zealand Prime Minister was speaking two months ago, and I went up and asked her if she would know of a woman in leadership. She's like, "Well, do you want a Prime Minister?" And I'm like, "Well, that would be nice." But for me, it's women's in leadership who, like, if you're leading, is hard. And so so I'm looking at the criteria is if you have 3 paid employees or
Mhm.
you're the prime minister of a country, anything in between. And I will share, I've just popped that in there with the map. If you go in there and you know a woman in leadership anywhere in the world, at the bottom, there's a link about how to participate. So I've got a lot of pendings, but I've left them all like that they're not, because until they come, then. So, and
Yeah.
the interesting thing, I was talking to Sneha about this earlier, that one of the very interesting findings, and I'll leave this with everybody that's listening, that to check yourselves, is that everybody that's responding to me within the form of an email is apologizing in some way. I hope this is kind of what you wanted. Sorry, this is late. And check yourself if you're doing that, because in some instances, it lowers barrier to making connection. But in some places, and certainly with men, it can actually impact our credibility.
Mm. Yes, that's something to catch ourselves with, definitely. We have a beautiful comment in the chat from Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. She says, "You three are all definitely leading ladies." But she looks up to someone named Shanda Sumner, who empowers business and mixes Christianity as well as her maternal grandma, who is the epitome of grace and love. That's really beautiful. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so
So
much.
lovely.
Vicky, I do have a question. How can women create circles of growth, not just networking, but real connection that sharpens and sustains them and helps them move into curiosity and asking that question of, am I made for something more? How do they grow that?
Yeah. I honestly think the easiest way to do this is to pay it forward
Mm,
because it doesn't require you to have a job. It just requires you to have a heart.
mm,
And paying it forward can be something as simple as, walking around the block and saying, hey, I like your dog, or hey, that color is really good on you. Like just the person in the checkout line, like, wow,
hmm
you are having a really good hair day, whatever it is. So getting really good at sort of paying it forward. And if a community doesn't exist that you need, then build it.
mm,
Invite one person, like create the mountain and see if they come. I've done a lot of pilots in my sort of pay it forward life, which is sort of outside anything that's paid. And it's women crave connection. So if you can't find it,
mm,
just find one buddy and like then just see who attracts to it. I'm not kidding.
mm,
It works. And I've done this maybe 6 times. So, and then, the whole idea of it's going to grow is that you kind of, the success of it is that if you stepped away, does it keep going? And it doesn't have to be complicated. But paying it forward is a really lovely way to make connection and then start building community. Or, shooting on Eventbrite for free events. I go on a Wednesday morning across the Harbour Bridge and I plunge at 7 a.m., rain or shine, winter or summer. And then we go and have a coffee shop and we share a peak and a pit and a learning every week. And this is a gorgeous group of people. We're all different ages, but there is something unique about that formula that not everybody will do. Most won't. So just find your source or create it.
mm. I love that. Kindness, right? Paying it forward, connection, and a little bit of coffee. That'll take you a long way.
In freezing cold water.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Get real, real, real fast.
And leadership is always about helping others become that best version of themselves. And that's why Leading Ladies is here as well. So we can just fill up our tool cup each month with little tips or big tips. It's never the one big thing, it's all the little things that make the big differences, I always say, from our guests, from our hosts, and from you. And when you said about paying it forward, as we began, because to run it, of course, everything always costs money around the world. But we created a B1G1 membership. So it's buy one, give one, because we work with a lot of some of the poorest women. And this is the most amazing thing. My husband and I spoke the other day, and I said, I don't know if I would have started the business if I knew I was going to work 7 days a week and then COVID was going to take it all away. And then I'd be starting again, like, it's almost insanity, right? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, but you wouldn't have traveled, met thousands of people, spoken on the seven continents, looking after 200 orphans and villages of some of the poorest women, all running small businesses. And I said, I wouldn't swap it for the world. So with your support, with our buy one, give one, it's just 88 membership. All the talks from around the world are going to go in each month from our different GMTs. The Conscious Leader is in there to download, and it has traveled the world now. And we've spoken on the seven continents with the Conscious Leader. It also has 6 workshops in there that you can work your way through, which I hope you find a lot of value. Anyway, it's all in there for 88. And then we send a link and a membership to another woman that is in a poorer country but wants that connection, everything we've just been speaking about. I'll hand back to you now, Sneha. Thank you, everyone. I'm Catherine Malloy, and I'd love to see you next month.
Thank you, Catherine. A huge thank you to Vicki Tyler and to all of you for joining Leading Ladies Lunches. Vicki, thank you so much for being with us and thank you for your insight.
Yeah, no, pleasure. This has been really fun. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day, and we will see you next month, which will be on December 11th. We'd love to have you join us again. And Vicki, thank you once again. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all of you who joined us. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Bye, Claudia.
Thank you.
Speak soon, everyone.
Bye.